Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. We're talking to Congressman Justin Amash about how to break down all of these political silos that cynical politicians are using to divide America, to tear it apart. We're also going to talk about, wait for it, Hayekian libertarianism. You do not want to miss this. So just come on, have a seat. My phone's off.
Oh, I should switch mine to silent.
Yeah.
I'll do that too.
And so I was Google stalking you as I do before I talk to anybody. I know a lot about a lot about your congressional career, but
It's like Howard Stern, right?
yeah. And this is sort of the got you question that starts this. But tell people who you are first, so we know who we're talking to.
Well, I'm Justin Amash. Hopefully, some people know that, but I'm a libertarian Republican. I represent the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. We go down to Battle Creek, Michigan, and I've been in Congress for 8 years now. So this is my 5th term in Congress, and you know, I'm a big believer in individual liberty, and I would describe my philosophy as Hayekian libertarian.
And we're going to dig into that because I think most people, except for myself, are saying I don't even know what that is. But we'll dig into that. But so I'm checking out your Twitter feed, which is where anybody that wants to know more about what Justin Amash is thinking, you pretty much live this radically transparent life where you explain what you're thinking and why you're voting and responding to people. And I was struck by this response you did, I think it's a couple of months ago. This was the first day of the swearing in of the 116th Congress. Congresswoman Omar from Minnesota, you remember this text. The 116th Congress has so much to be proud of, and there's all these green check marks. First Somali American plus refugee, first Muslim women, first indigenous women, first Palestinian American, youngest, and she's talking about AOC at 28 years old, record 100 plus women, and it goes on and on and on about all these things that the new Democratic House had accomplished. And you responded with sort of a fact check, say, wait a minute, she's not the first Palestinian American. I was.
Yeah. Well, you know, even I'm not the first Palestinian American, so I just wanted to make sure she knew that I exist.
Yeah.
But, you know, you've got John Sununu, who is in Congress as well. And, you know, he's got some Palestinian background as well. So I think it's easy to assume that because someone comes in and they wear it all on their sleeves and they're, you know, telling everyone every second that they're from a particular background, that they must be the only one.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have a slightly different take on the whole thing. And, you know, I just reminding people that it's easy to dismiss those of us who are proud of our backgrounds, but we're not going around, you know, parading it everywhere.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, what her tweet said to me is exactly where I wanted to take this conversation, because it seems like when the new left, I'm not sure what to call it, the identity left, and they've created all these silos, and there's of course some silos are more virtuous than other silos, but it's silos based on ethnicity and religion and skin color and sexual preference, and there's now dozens, maybe there's hundreds of silos that the modern left has created, but it doesn't feel like it's bringing people together. I feel like they're redividing us based on all of these things. And what was interesting about your response is I suspect most people don't know that your dad was Palestinian.
And a refugee.
Yeah, and a refugee, because that's not your identity. Your identity is an American.
That's right. Yeah, and you know, I'm proud of my background. I really was shaped very much by my background and by my dad's experience. In fact, I would say that one of the reasons I'm a libertarian is largely due to my dad's experience of being a refugee and coming to the United States. And my mom is also an immigrant from Syria. And that really shaped who I am, and is probably the reason I love America so much and am so proud to be an American, and am so inspired by the system we have here, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, the ideals that it represents. I think it was largely shaped by my background. But my parents and especially my dad growing up really emphasized we are Americans and we're proud to be here, and we are so thankful to this country for giving us this opportunity. The opportunity for my brothers and I to be born here in the United States. It's just it's amazing.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your parents' journey? Your dad was, what was he running from?
Well,
because refugee implies that he had to get out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a war going on there.
Yeah.
This was 1948, and he was in the middle of a conflict, and there was a conflict between, many Jews coming in, and many Muslims and Christians, which were the smallest population there, at least of those three groups, were largely, bystanders. So they were affected by the conflict, but nobody really, wanted them around.
Yeah.
So, there they were, living there, and they basically weren't sure whether this was a safe place to be. They fled their homes out of fear. I remember my dad telling me that they were, removed from their homes at gunpoint and told, hey, you shouldn't be here. This is not safe for any of you.
That's a fairly clear signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You Christians, you don't want to suffer the fate of other people, so it's time to get out of here.
Yeah.
And they fled.
Yeah. And correct my history, but a church in Grand Rapids sponsored your dad or both your parents?
Well, it was in close to Grand Rapids. It was a church in Muskegon.
Okay.
And it was a minister and his wife sponsored my dad's family.
Okay.
And it was called Church of the Brethren. And the family was called the Wagner family, and my dad still stays in touch with them. And they were looking to sponsor a Christian family to come to the United States. They wanted to sponsor someone from the Middle East and from Palestine. And my dad's father was not an educated man, certainly not an expert in a lot of things, but he knew one thing, which is if he can get to the United States with his family, that was the best thing for them. And that was the most important decision for our family. The fact that he made that decision as little as he may have known about, about the world, and he knew if I go to the United States with my family, they'll have an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'm experiencing the blessings of that now.
Yeah. The American dream.
That's right.
And your dad met your mom here?
Well, my dad met my great aunt, Linda, and met her in Michigan. And she had a family still in the Middle East, my mom. And, my great aunt's sisters, my grandma, obviously. And so my mom's family was still in Syria. And my dad was told, hey, if you're over there, my great aunt said, my family lives over there. So they connected that way. He was going back to the Middle East on a trip, and he happened to have the opportunity to stop by and visit with my grandma and her family, and that's where he met my mom.
Yeah. But your story as an American, your dad was always, particularly proud to be here.
Yes.
And proud to have made that choice. And I suspect, I mean, we'll get into this, but maybe that's really where your libertarianism came from.
Yes. I mean, my dad was so happy to be here. Growing up, that's the thing I remember most, is my dad telling me all the time, and my brothers, that we are so blessed to be in the United States. We're blessed to be in a place where it doesn't matter what your last name is, it doesn't matter what your religious background is or your ethnic background. And, we happen to be Christians, so it was actually much easier to come here than many other people. But nonetheless, he emphasized how important it was that we were in a place where your background didn't matter. In so many countries, you make it or don't make it based on whether you are connected to the government or you're connected to the ruling class or you're from the right ethnic group. And you just look at the Middle East, where my parents came from. There's so much corruption. So much of it is just based on who do you know. And in the United States, he told us, you can come here or you can be born here and you can make it regardless of your background. And this doesn't mean you're going to be, amazingly wealthy or anything like that. It just means that you can provide for your family and be comfortable on your own. You don't have to have the government assisting you this way or that way, or cutting you a special favor because you're connected to them. Here in the United States, you can make it. In other countries, you can't make it, because if you're not on the right side of the government or the right side of whichever ethnic group's in control, in other countries, you're not going to make it. You're going to always be held back. They're going to force you down. And here they can't stop you. So, that really stuck with me, those stories he'd tell me. And that's why when I come to this and when I talk about my background, it's always in terms of what a blessing it is to be here. I think that I do bring a lot with my cultural background. I can educate people about things that they might not be aware of around the world. And I have maybe a deeper appreciation of some of the customs and cultures around the world than many people who haven't experienced that. But, when I present it, when I talk about it, I like to emphasize how important it is that we were given this opportunity and how much of a blessing that is.
There, trying to figure out today, particularly in the context of the identity politics on the left and the right, what's the balance between, who your parents were, who your grandparents were, versus who we are and what our common bounds are as Americans. And I feel like we may be losing track of the difference between those things and how they fit together.
Well, I think we're supposed to be a country that follows the rule of law, that has a system that applies equally to everyone. And then, of course, you bring your different cultures, your different backgrounds to it, and people live together peacefully in this country, regardless of their backgrounds. I think you do see more and more people trying to emphasize the differences and suggesting that we're not alike. When, in fact, I do think we share so much in common, even though we do come from different places. Someone who has a background, that where they were born here and their ancestry was here for generations and generations, has a lot in common with someone who is, a new immigrant like my dad. They love America for the same reasons. They love America because, we have opportunity here and we have liberty here and we can make choices for our own lives. And I think that it is dangerous to constantly be trying to divide us and to suggest that we're all different and really we don't share that much in common. And actually, this is one of my objections with the partisan structure of government right now, where the two sides are so partisan and people have become so partisan. It's an extension of this same issue where people are trying to divide us and always make us into different things, as though we're not all just people.
Yeah, it feels more heightened than ever, perhaps by social media. It feels like tribal warfare. Like,
yeah,
and most of the identity of each party is more about what you're against. You're against those guys, right, as opposed to this is what I'm for. And that seems to be a shift from where we were even back in the old Tea Party days.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always been partisanship. There's always been differences that people emphasize. But I think more and more you have a politics where everyone has to emphasize how much they don't like the other side.
Yeah. And
they have to own the other side. And I tweeted about this the other day, talking about how it seems like everyone has to conclude their tweet about their political perspective by taking a shot at the other side.
Yeah.
Like, why can't they just say what they think and leave it there? Why does it always have to be, but Republicans, blah, 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 or but Democrats will never figure this out? Or why the extra shot? Like, yeah, just let it be. I understand why someone might do it sometimes, why, you get frustrated and you might say something. And I think we've all done that from time to time where we say something out of frustration. But many people nowadays do it out of habit on every single issue. And I think that's not good for our country.
Yeah. So let's get back to your story for a second, because I think my hope is that maybe this thing you're calling Hayekian libertarian has a path forward for everybody. But like you surely weren't reading Hayek in grade school, right?
No, I wasn't. And in fact,
I was, by the way.
So
it's a horrible way.
Imagine.
It's a horrible way to meet girls by quoting that stuff. Don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of wish I had read Hayek in grade school, but it's sometimes complicated stuff. So, English wasn't his first language, and his sentences are sometimes long. But, I was always anti-authoritarian. I didn't really think of myself as a libertarian as a kid because I didn't really know what it was. When you're growing up, you hear about it, but you thought that just meant like, the Air Force should be privatized or something. Like you didn't know what does it mean to be a libertarian. And I came to understand my place in the sort of philosophical world as I got older. In fact, I studied economics. My degree's in economics, and I don't think we ever talked about Hayek. Not once.
I'm not shocked at all.
I went through undergrad economics, got my degree. I don't think Hayek was ever discussed. I went to law school. I'm not sure Hayek was ever discussed. And he's critical in both fields,
right? Both
in economics and law.
Yeah,
and never discussed. And I didn't really discover him until after I was done with law school. I was trying to figure out where I fit in, because I've always been nominally a Republican. I grew up, supporting Republican candidates and generally liking what Republicans said. In practice, obviously, they didn't follow through on a lot of the things they talked about. But I at least felt like between the two major parties, this was the party that was going in the better direction, more aligned with my perspective. But I always found some differences, and one day I decided, I better figure out where I am in this philosophical world. I'm done with law school now. I'm an adult. I've got to sort of figure out where I stand.
Now, weren't you sort of flirting with potentially running for something, or is this even before that?
This was before I started thinking about running. I mean, since I was, I'd say even in high school and college, I thought about maybe running, but I never it was never some concrete thing. I thought I would become a lawyer basically.
Yeah.
And maybe someday I would run for something. But, you know, even before I got to the point where I was seriously considering running,
You're just
remember
trying to figure out.
Just trying to figure out where I'm at. And,
which box.
Yeah. And I remember, going to like Google and going into the search bar and typing in what I believed. You know, it was a weird search, right?
Right.
Like who types this into a Google search? But
Right.
I start to type in what I believe in the Google search, and up pops Hayek's Wikipedia page. And I found it astonishing on so many levels. Well, first of all, Wikipedia was largely influenced by this idea of spontaneous order that Hayek.
Yeah, Jimmy Wales says it was that he was sort of ripping off Hayek when he sort of let this spontaneous emergence of knowledge thing happen.
Right. So I mean, Wikipedia in some sense is a Hayekian project.
Right. Right.
And there I read the Hayek page, and I was like, yeah, this is what I believe. This guy is saying what I think. And so I was like, well, I better start reading some of his books. So I started reading The Road to Serfdom, which is, I think, where everyone probably starts with Hayek. I'm not sure about you when you were in grade school, but but I think most people, when they first pick up something from Hayek, they pick up The Road to Serfdom. And then from there, I went to some of his essays and just started basically devouring Hayek, reading as much as I could. And I found this man extremely insightful, fascinating. He was putting into words things that I had thought but did not really know how to frame them effectively. And, I think that changed my life in many ways.
And you eventually, I know this just because, and I think it's still true, but certainly the first time I went into your congressional office, all of my intellectual heroes greeted me when I stepped in the front door, and I always joke that you have a picture of Carl Menger in your office.
I'm pretty sure I'm the only person with Carl Menger on the wall.
Yeah, well, certainly the only member of Congress and perhaps a club of maybe a dozen people in the world that have a picture of Carl Menger, the founder of the Austrian School of Economics.
Yeah.
But you had Mises and Hayek and Rothbard and Rand. And
you wouldn't believe how often I talk about the subjective theory of value.
Yeah. and people are entranced by that.
I mean, it's... the stuff I picked up just from starting to read, especially with Hayek, but I moved on and read other works as well.
Yeah.
It was just invigorating in many ways. It was the kind of stuff I was already thinking, but hadn't really been able to frame, as I said, in a way that was concise and I feel like it's so critical to the work I do. The reason I have these Austrian economists up on my wall is because they remind me of what I should be doing as a legislator, about the importance of liberty and of not trying to control the entire system. That we have a world built upon spontaneous order, and too often legislators are trying to be like busybodies, trying to control everything and dictate outcomes. That's why, my staff know that the rule of law is probably the most important principle we follow. Like, we always have to follow the Constitution. Obviously, I'm working in the U.S. government. I have to follow the Constitution. But if you talk about a principle that I must follow, in addition to following the Constitution, it's the rule of law. And these individuals in the Austrian school really helped develop that idea of the rule of law, and especially Hayek.
Yeah. The knowledge and the way that knowledge emerges from the process of free people working together is sort of the basis by which I filter everything around me. And it's a pretty reliable way to think about things. But for those people watching or listening to this, let's sort of walk them through a little bit of what Hayek argued. He was spending the first half of his career arguing with actual socialists, and then John Maynard Keynes, famously now captured in a famous rap video where he's debating Keynes, but he was sort of banging his head against the wall because he was trying to explain to very technocratic economists why they couldn't do what they wanted to do. What was the Hayekian insight?
Well, the insight from my perspective is that order emerges spontaneously, that it's through the interaction of thousands or millions or even billions of people on our planet that you get an order that is constructed. And, he really thought of the law as something that emerges. Kind of like people might talk about the common law. It's something that emerges and is discovered over long periods of time, and that
just by people
interacting.
Stuff.
Yeah. So like he often talks about how people want to, especially in government, they want to sort of analyze things from afar and make decisions for people, make determinations about what people should do. But the government, it doesn't ever have the knowledge it needs to make these decisions, because there's something that he calls the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place.
Yeah.
And this is the knowledge that each of us has as we walk around in life. We have knowledge that is particular to us and our circumstances, and other people don't have that knowledge. And so you can't have the government making these determinations when it's missing a whole bunch of information. And there are all sorts of laws that develop that we don't think of as laws necessarily. Like when you go to a store and you stand in a line, it's not because the state of Michigan told you to do so or because the federal government instructed you to do so. You know that you stand in a line. That's what happens. It's a sort of law that has developed. And if someone cuts in line, everyone's upset.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's like, hey, that's okay. People are upset about it. But there's no law about it from the government. The law developed spontaneously. And these kind of things are all around us every day. And I think we don't appreciate them enough. And I think really that was his insight, that people have particular knowledge that is localized, that is just for them. And they can utilize that knowledge. And it's actually the interactions of all these people that allow us to accomplish great things in the world.
I think
and he had a suspicion of like this sort of constructivism, this idea that you could use reason to determine things. He actually viewed people as, he was a little bit cynical about how much people actually knew in terms of scientific knowledge and all that, and thought, well, the reason we do great things is actually because a lot of us individually, we might not know that much, but interacting, we learn a lot. Yeah.
Well, he would eventually call those I call them scientistic types, and economics was one of the primary areas where they had reduced all of human action into a number and a set of equations, and ascribing all sorts of assumptions about your preferences and your abilities and all that stuff. And if you could in fact design the economy from the top down, and it's just crunching the numbers and ascribing values to things, Hayek and Mises before him would argue socialism would work if you could do that, but you can't do that.
Yep.
And the knowledge emerges from the process, and absent the process, you can't get to better solutions. But this idea, like I've been trying to explain to people, you know, Matt, you're a libertarian, but that just seems like this romantic, idealistic thing. And I've been trying to explain in a way that you just did about standing in line at a grocery store. Nobody told anybody to do that. Or maybe your mom did when you were 6
Right.
and you cut in line. And she,
Yeah, my mom learned it from
Yeah.
someone else, and you know, that's how the law passes on, and it's evolved.
but you know, when we talk about the rule of law, and these are really sort of rules of civil conduct, right?
Mhm.
These are just the way that we figured out how to do things over tens and hundreds of years. But when we talk about the rule of law, I feel like a lot of people, particularly on the left, are probably hearing something else. They're thinking they're thinking sort of an arbitrariness of the man coming down on you and telling you what to do.
I think this is because you know, people on the right often don't understand what it means.
Yeah.
I mean, I sometimes hear the president talk about it, and when he says it, he means law and order,
Right.
which is something totally different.
Right.
It's not about the government being tough and all that. What it's really about is general rules that are equally applicable. In fact, I think what best embodies the rule of law is the Equal Protection Clause. And it's probably not the first provision in the Constitution that comes to mind when people talk about libertarianism. They might think of other parts of the First Amendment, obviously. If you ask, you know, some others, they might say the Second Amendment. So there are other provisions that people think of and associate with libertarianism, and I often think of the Equal Protection Clause as being sort of that amendment that probably best approximates, at least from a Hayekian perspective, what libertarianism is. And in fact, Hayek himself was thinking about how to draft an amendment at the federal level, because the Equal Protection Clause is related to state action.
Yeah.
So he was thinking of how to write one up for the federal level that would be, you know, embodying this principle of the rule of law. But yeah, it's very different from this sort of tough guy, like, you know, we're going to have tough laws and everyone's got to stay in line. It's not that kind of thing.
Yeah, the rules should be simple and fair and
Yes.
equally applied. And this is why Lady Justice is blindfolded.
Yeah, and what Hayek would say is general rules of just conduct.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's what he thought of as the law.
Yeah. And even those rules, going back to your earlier point, you know, Hayek makes a distinction between laws and legislation.
Yes.
Fundamental difference. And, you know, the laws that we all agree are just and fair, again, were stolen from your mom and your grandma. You know, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, take responsibility, mind your own business. The laws that matter, that hold civil society together, aren't enforced by government so much as that they're commonly accepted rules of conduct.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, I think a lot of legislators just get it backward. They get their role backward. They don't understand what they're there for. And my job is to ensure that society can operate freely, where people can make decisions for themselves. They can determine the outcomes for their own lives. They figure out their own purposes in life. Whereas a lot of my colleagues think that we have to figure out the purpose for people. We have to tell them what they must do. And so this is another way of framing, you know, what Hayek was talking about. It's the difference between setting out some abstract rules for conduct versus giving commands. And a lot of my colleagues, they want to give commands, telling people how to do things. And I want to just lay out rules of general conduct and allow people to make their own decisions about how to do things.
Yeah, which is sort of I think maybe that's the secret to what a Hayekian libertarian is all about. How would you define that term? Like if you were forced to translate that into English so that people other than you and I understood what that meant.
So, you know, it is very hard to explain, I think, in a very short way. And this is why Hayek wrote whole books about this, right? But I would say there's a big emphasis on evolutionary processes.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that people interact with each other and they develop their own framework for society through these interactions using their own knowledge, rather than having something constructed for them from afar. And I think it's just this idea that people make their own decisions using their own knowledge, and that's the best way for society to progress. It doesn't mean that mistakes won't be made along the way, but it is the best way to sort of filter out those errors and come to some new conclusions, or try lots of different things.
Yeah. So since we've been talking about Hayek, I feel like we need to drop a Ludwig von Mises quote in here somewhere. You know, he wrote this book, Liberalism. I think it's one of his better books, and he wrote it, published in 1927. He's looking at the emergence of radical nationalism in what would become Nazi Germany, and pushing against that grain. He talked about what he called the liberal vision, and by liberal, we should probably use the word libertarian, because it in no way represents what modern liberalism has become. But he talked about a world where people, regardless of their ethnicity, skin color, religion, cultural background, could come together through exchange and cooperation, and it was a cosmopolitan vision that he had, and he was trying to explain what liberalism was, classical libertarian liberalism, and it was in the context of radical communists fighting with radical fascists over who would be in charge to impose their vision from the top down. It strikes me that he was a little bit premature, and maybe that vision is exactly the solution to our current tribal warfare.
Well, you know, I think the United States has been progressing in recent years more toward sort of this European-style politics, where you have nationalists versus socialists.
Yeah.
And what really unites those groups is their belief in collectivism, or having some vision imposed from the top down. With nationalism, it's often centered around some kind of ethnic loyalty, like you have, you're part of an ethnic group, and your people are superior to the other people. And with socialism, it's this idea that those who are struggling need to unite and control the government and put all the wealth in the government, and then have it somehow distributed equally by flawed human beings who don't have all the information to make these decisions, nor do they have the goodwill to make these decisions.
Yeah.
So I think we are heading in a dangerous direction. And one thing you'll often hear me talk about is how much I dislike the partisanship. And it's closely connected to this idea that we're moving in this sort of nationalist versus socialist direction. Both of those ideologies, nationalism and socialism and fascism and other sorts of isms, can thrive in a system where people are very divided and where they don't trust each other, and where there's no virtue in the people. In fact, they do thrive in those situations. That's precisely where they do thrive. They like environments where people are extremely divided and not trusting of each other. And liberty requires a society and a culture where people trust each other, where where the people are virtuous, where they are willing to have honest debates with each other. That's required for liberty to work. And I think people who spend so much time, owning the libs or whatever they want to however they want to term it,
Right.
are missing the point that they are sowing the seeds of their own destruction. That this kind of hostility, antagonism, just for the sake of antagonizing the other side, does not make liberty something that can succeed going forward. It undermines liberty.
Yeah.
And you can't have liberty in a society where everyone hates each other.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
I look at, and I don't know how much of this is social media versus a trend towards European-style tribalism, but you look at the reemergence of Antifa and their explicitly and celebratedly violent tactics. They think that violence is just fine, which I view as a fundamentally un-American attitude. I'm old school. I still think MLK got it right. And then I watched this Vice special about Charlottesville and the neo-Nazis and white nationalists, and I'm like, what the hell's going on in this country? But I think we've inherited this fight from the Antifa got its rise in the early European fight between fascism and socialism. But when you talk to the new democratic socialists, some of your colleagues, we can't possibly do a podcast without mentioning Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I did a deep dive on what she was saying the day she won that election. I didn't see that coming. I don't think the Democrats certainly didn't see that coming. But her first video, maybe you've seen it, the one that made her viral, I found myself agreeing with everything she was saying right up until the very end, where she says, and that's why we need Medicare for all, and they have that litany of big government stuff that they put at the end of their stuff. But before that, she was talking about how the incumbent had lost faith with his community. He was now a creature of Washington. He wasn't a creature of the where's she from? The Bronx?
Yeah,
Queens,
I think so.
Bronx, something like that. That he was in bed with Wall Street. He had been a chief engineer of the Wall Street bailout, along with Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner and a Republican president. And her vision, it sounded like, was really about communities working together from the bottom up in voluntary cooperation to solve problems. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not socialism. That's us. That's who we are. And it's that Hayekian vision of communities and people with that personal knowledge sort of working stuff out. And lo and behold, things just get better. Things get better when people are free to work stuff out. So I wonder, I'm not going to assign you to convince her that she's not really a socialist if that's what she believes. But I think a lot of young people that are entranced by what we're now calling democratic socialism, I don't think they're looking for socialism at all. I think they're looking for that community-based cooperation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is another reason why I do spend a lot of time trying to persuade people rather than always fighting everyone.
Yeah.
I go to my town halls and I try to talk to people on the left and understand their issues and understand their concerns. And the way I look at it is I try to reveal to them what they may not be aware of, which is that we have a common set of principles, that we actually share a lot of the same principles. Now, when it comes to applying those principles, I do think that people often make mistakes. They often misread the situation or don't realize how they're doubling down on something that actually they claim to be opposed to.
Yeah.
They want more community control of things, but actually they want to hand it to the federal government somehow. It doesn't add up. And if you can connect with people on principles, if you can show them, yeah, we are one people, we share these principles. Actually, we're not that far off. And I really believe that. I believe Americans share a very large set of common principles. If we can get that understood by a lot of people, I do think that many people will come over to classical liberalism or libertarianism because it's an appealing philosophy. You know, when I talk to people, they can see that whether the Republicans are asking me a question or the Democrats are asking me a question at the town hall, my answers will be similar, and it's not based on any sort of, you know, partisan leanings. It's based on this philosophy that people at home can do things better. People can make decisions for themselves a lot better than the federal government can make those decisions. And actually, that is what people want.
Yeah.
They might not realize it, but that is what they want if they really think about it.
Yeah. You know, I think Hayek may have actually anticipated the emergence of democratic socialism because, and I think this was law, legislation, and liberty as well. He was talking about three types of value sets. Like there's the values that you and I practice without anyone telling us to do so when we engage with each other. And it's how you interact with people in your world. And then there's the rules, the values that have emerged spontaneously over all of these years that teach us how to sort of act as a civil society. And then there's the values that the central planners of all sorts and flavors and academics would love to impose on us from the top down. And that feels like that's the political fight. Like somebody that thinks they're smarter than us want to impose that. But those aren't American values.
No, they're not American values. From the very beginning, and you know, I want to add that I think the founders did not always live up to the values that they espoused. You know, we had slavery at the beginning of our nation, our country here, but the principles they talked about, regardless of whether they were able to apply them correctly or chose to apply them correctly, the principles were good and sound principles, and they were principles of individuals making decisions for their own lives. And, you know, I think that I mentioned slavery as an example of how they really missed the boat in a horrendous way.
Right.
And a lot of times when I talk to people on the left, it's hard for them to overcome those kind of faults by our founders. They say, well, why should we trust the system that they put in place, our Constitution, that allowed such a horrific thing to happen? And, you know, sometimes and often in life, people have principles. They have a set of principles, but they do not apply them correctly or don't understand how they should be applied. And in some cases, the outcome is horrific, like it was in the early days. And in other cases, it's not as serious. But just because people have done bad things doesn't mean that they didn't have sound principles. They just didn't follow their own principles.
Yeah, yeah. So let's fast forward to today. I still think that sort of, I would call it radical individualism of the founders. They were unique in the sense that they thought that people, individuals, mattered more than government. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Jefferson was even quite the democratic romantic. He thought that people could work stuff out, which way before his time, right? And people I don't think fully appreciate just how ambitious and radical the American experiment was. And by the way, we're in a garage, so we have horns, and that may be one of your staffers telling you that you gotta wrap this up. But fast forward to today, young people are, according to every scare poll that I see, are leaning more towards socialism than capitalism. But more importantly, perhaps they're leaving the two-party duopoly.
That's what they say, though.
Yeah, that's what they say.
That's what they say, but they don't believe it.
Yeah, they don't believe it. They're looking for an alternative, and I think it's very much related to them leaving the red box and the blue box and registering as independents to the extent they register at all. What's going on there, and how do we meet the challenge of these young generations?
Well, I think they largely view...
Someone go outside and beat that guy up, by the way.
They largely view conservatism or the Republican Party or the right from what appears on TV these days, or in social media. It's a lot of nationalism, and it's government control in a different way. Big government, but just to other ends, not the ends that they want. And they often view it as protecting large corporations and monopolies and all these other things. So I think that's their vision of free markets, because that's, they hear Republicans talking about free markets, and then they see Republicans controlling things actually, and they think, well, that must be what free markets is.
Yeah, bailing out Wall Street and helping their
It's just the
buddies.
government helping other people, not us.
Right.
And
cronyism.
Yeah, it's cronyism. And I think it's important that they recognize that is not free markets. That is not liberty. That is not the vision that that people like Hayek had, or even the founders had when they put together the Constitution. That was not their vision for America. And I think young people have been blessed with so many of the benefits of capitalism and freedom, and maybe don't think about it that much. They have these smartphones, and they've got the internet, and compared to people 20, 30, 40 years ago, the things that people have today are just incredible.
Yeah.
It's an incredible difference in wealth. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking comparatively, like, how am I compared to other people today? Is there someone richer than me? Instead of thinking about the wealth that markets have created for everyone.
Right.
Even the most basic automobiles today are much nicer than the nicest automobiles 30 years ago. The phone you have is more advanced by far than anything NASA had, when they were sending people to the moon. And I think people lose sight of that, how much wealth that is actually a gain to them as individuals. And that came about through markets. Through people interacting freely and making trades. It's not through government control. And everyone can see this. They always say to me, Justin, tell me one country that has tried libertarianism. And I always say that's the easiest question I've ever had. And the country is America. America's tried libertarianism. Now, is it the idealistic libertarianism of Hayek? Is it a perfect libertarianism? No, of course not. But America is a country that tried it. And actually, the results have shown that it works. All you have to do is compare the results in this country to other large countries around the world. I think it's disingenuous to compare to city-states.
Right.
But compare us to other large countries around the world, and you'll see it's like night and day, the difference. In terms of wealth creation here, in terms of invention. Think about all of the great technologies around the world and how much are from America. And that's not a coincidence. People always act like it's just a coincidence, just happened. It happened to be the case that Americans invented all these things and that our companies are doing fantastic around the world. It just happens to be the case. It's not something that is a coincidence. It's because we believe in the value of markets and freedom and individual liberty and creation and failure. We believe in all of these things, that they're part of a process for becoming better. And as a result, people in America live much better off than people in so many countries around the world. And I think it's so easy to lose sight of that.
So making that sale so that we don't screw it up. Like we don't hand it over to Washington, D.C. to solve all of our problems. And I feel like both parties are making that argument right now. Give me the power, I'll make America great again.
Yeah.
I wanted to get through this whole process without mentioning Donald Trump, but of course Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, anybody that is sort of aspiring to say, give me the power and I'll fix it. I feel like in a lot of ways, small L libertarians are Switzerland, because we don't want anybody to have the power. We want to democratize power. We want to shift it back to people so that they can solve problems for themselves. That has to be a wide lane to take this idea through. Maybe it's right down the middle, and maybe it's just on a different highway altogether. I don't know. It's there's something there.
I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think most Americans believe this. They believe in the power of liberty and freedom and markets. They believe in these things. They don't always think through how much they believe in them. If you press them on particular circumstances, they say, yeah, I guess I really do believe in markets. I really do want to decide these things for myself and not have the government tell me. But often it's on different issues. Like they're thinking about the issues that are right in front of them.
Yeah.
And they hear about stuff on the news, and they sometimes think, well, I wish Washington would decide that. But when it applies to their own life, they say, well, yeah, I guess I do want to decide that for myself. So I think people really do believe in a common set of principles. I don't think they're looking for some kind of government savior. A lot of politicians are running on, like you mentioned, hey, elect me and I'll save the country. And I don't think that's what most people are looking for, because people understand that one person can't save the country. Like what saves the country is the country working together in communities.
Yeah.
People making decisions for their own lives and having the freedom to do so. That's what makes the country great. It can't be made great by any one person.
So your dad was a radical optimist. He went through heroic efforts
Yes.
to get to the United States because he believed that what he was going to find here was better than anything else he could imagine. Are you an optimist like your dad, or are we in trouble?
So I'm an optimist for the American people. I think that our government's in trouble. I do think that people in government are doing worse today than they were even when I started not that long ago. I mean, I think things have deteriorated. But I go home and people are so nice, so positive, so considerate. They're encouraging me all the time and saying, thank you for what you do. And I do think most Americans feel that way. They feel like they want to make decisions for their own lives, and they don't want the government telling them what to do in every circumstance. And they want someone who's just going to be honest and go represent them in a way that maximizes their happiness and their freedom. Gives them the opportunity to seek their own happiness. And so I do feel good about where the American people are. I think that we are living in the best times. People talk about, it used to be better, and I think that's part of like the whole "Make America Great Again" thing. Well, it's like, make America great again. This is as good as it's been.
Yeah.
And yes, we're all going to have issues with particular things that happen in government, and we might have a particular government program we don't like, or a particular thing we don't like. But guess what? People are generally better off today. They're healthier, they're happier than at any time in history.
So that sounds like a story that we should both be telling more often. We libertarians are so great about raging against the machine, and we could do a whole nother program about all the stupid things that our government did to us probably just this week or this month. But we never sort of tell that beautiful story of what happens when people are free, and that it's kind of hard to do because we don't know. Because that's the whole point. Like, we don't know unless the process happens.
That's right. And that's, that's what often makes like central planning so alluring to people, because they kind of know what they're going to get. The government says, I'm going to do this thing for you. And the alternative is freedom. And with freedom, well, good things can happen, bad things can happen. You don't know. You don't know exactly what the item is. But if you want to have the opportunity for growth and progress into society, then you have to have that freedom. You have to have that ability to take risks, to make decisions for your own life, and to experience failure and success. And it's the failure that helps build up that success over time. And I think people don't appreciate how much that has played out here in the United States, and how great a country we live in, and what great times we live in. I think we are, in most respects, freer than ever.
I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for watching Kibbe on Liberty. By now, you know this is the most important event of your week. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Click the little bell so you get notifications. Kibbe on Liberty, mostly honest conversations with mostly interesting people.